What is up, homies? My name is Felix and I am here today back again with another LMMS video. And this video is another pretty beginner one. I know a lot of you probably already know how to do a lot of this stuff, but today for the people who don't know how to do it, I'm going to be showing you guys how to export inside of LMMS. I'm going to be showing you how to export MIDI files, how to export trackouts, and how to export just, the whole beat by itself as well. Also, even if you do think you know how to do most of this stuff, you should stick around because there might be one or two things that you can learn from this video as well. So yeah, let's just get started. But before we do that, you guys should check out my Instagram and my SoundCloud. Those will be down in the description below, along with the playlist of songs I produce, my Discord, my beat store, all that stuff. Go check it out. And yeah, now let's get into this video. So I have this little beat here. This beat I just made for, the purposes of this tutorial. It sounds like this. So yeah, not too complicated, but I'm just going to be using this beat for the example for today's video. So the first thing I'm going to show you guys how to do is export MIDI files. So with MIDI files, there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind. So MIDI files are basically just the data that are stored within your patterns. It's basically just like pattern data. So this stuff right here, all this information here, all this data that you've created when you clicked in your melody, when you clicked in your notes, is the stuff that the MIDI file is going to save. So if I were to take a MIDI file from LMMS and put it inside of FL Studio or in Ableton or Logic or whatever, it should work the same throughout, all programs. And it also would work if you were to take it from, one LMMS project file to another LMMS project file. So let's say you make a really nice melody, but you just can't do anything with the drums, at that point in time. What you can do is you can save the MIDI file, and then you can drag that MIDI file into another project and work on it, at a different tempo, which is another thing that's really nice about MIDI files, is that you don't have to worry about the tempo either. You can make it whatever tempo you want and the MIDI file will still stay the same. So yeah, that's a pretty cool thing about MIDI files. And basically with MIDI files, what you do is you go up to File, you do Export MIDI, and then you just find wherever you want to save it to. So if I were to go to music, you can just save it as whatever you want and then just click save. But before you do that, one thing that you should note is that the way that your MIDIs are going to be saved is basically like this. So when you click export MIDI, it's going to save the patterns for all of these instruments here. So it's going to save the pattern for the 808, the clap, snare, all that stuff as well. So basically it'll save all of these little notes too, and it'll put them, all on top of each other in the way that you have arranged it right here. So if you want your MIDI pattern to just be like 4 bars or 8 bars and not, the entire song, what you can do is you can delete all of this stuff right here and then just have this. Alright, so we have a clean slate now, and if I wanted to just save the piano data, what I would do is I would click into piano, and then I would go to File and Export MIDI, and then just save it as whatever you want, as I showed you earlier. So yeah, that's pretty much the basics for exporting MIDI files. MIDI files are super useful, and I would recommend utilizing them, whenever possible. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to show you guys how to do is how to export a beat, just the entire beat itself. So once you've, laid out your beat and done everything that you need to do, what you do is you go to File, and then you go to Export. And so then you can, pick whatever name that you want it to be called, and then click save, and now it'll bring you to this screen right here, and you're gonna have a few different options, nothing too crazy, but the first thing you want to look at is the file format. So WAV files are gonna be much bigger than MP3 files, which is the other thing that we have, and OGG files are files that are really never used very commonly at all. So I would just ignore this option altogether because you're usually never gonna use this. So yeah, either you're gonna use MP3 or you're gonna use WAV. So MP3 files are much smaller and much more compressed, which basically means that the MP3 file is going to have lower quality than the WAV file would have. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, because WAVs are an uncompressed file and they are larger, have more data stored, it's going to take longer for the beat to actually export than it would with an MP3 file. So yeah, just keep that in mind as well, that a WAV will definitely take longer than an MP3 to export. Usually when I'm sending beats to rappers and doing stuff like that, MP3 files will get the job done just fine, because usually you want to email MP3 files, you don't want to email WAV files, because WAV files are usually going to be way too big to fit into an email, and you'll probably run into a lot of complications if you're using Gmail or iCloud or whatever else you might be using. Using a really big file like a WAV file is probably going to cause some problems for you. So yeah, I like to do MP3, but WAV has its uses as well. So with your WAV files, you probably want your sample rate to either be 48,000 or 44,000. It doesn't really matter which one, honestly. You can use the lowest setting and it'll still sound fine. I don't think I've ever used this one before, or honestly I don't think I've ever used anything anything above 48,000, because at that point it's kind of just overkill. These two will get the job done just fine, so I'll usually leave it on this one. And then with the bit depth, honestly, it doesn't really matter either. 32-bit float is probably going to be the biggest and highest quality. 16-bit is going to be the lowest quality, but it's really nothing that's significant that's really going to make a difference. So you can honestly just do 16-bit. And then the interpolation, you can just leave this as sync medium because, you know, it says recommended anyways. And then oversampling, I would just keep that on 1. It's not really a big deal either. And then clicking export as loop will basically do exactly what it says, and it'll remove the end silence. So basically, let's say this piano is at the end of the song. As you can hear, it still keeps going a little bit after the piano pattern ends. So essentially that's what that setting is talking about. If you click the export as loop, it'll just cut off that little end thing right there. So yeah. So the other little setting we have here is export between loop markers, and if you click this will basically just export everything that you have in between here. So let's say I were to do this like this, or if I were to go like this, it would export everything that's between this 1 and this, you know, 13 right here. So all of this would get exported. There would be this like weird silence here. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to that. You probably won't use that setting unless you're trying to just, like, let's say export this piano so that you don't have to use the plugin and it doesn't take up as much CPU. So if you wanted to just export this and then you could drag it back in as a sample or something like that, that might be, you know, one potential use for that setting, but I don't usually use that very much. So now the other important file type is MP3 files, and for this one you probably want to have your bitrate be up to 320 because that's the highest one, or you can probably do any of these top 3, but you don't want to drop it down way too much because then it'll just, you know, not sound as good. And with MP3 files it matters a little bit more, you know, what settings you do for the quality, but I usually just like to have this at 320 because it's the highest, you know, setting. And then also for this, you want to do this either stereo or joint stereo. I don't really know the difference between joint stereo and stereo. Joint stereo seems to be the default setting here, but, you know, stereo is pretty standard. So if you don't want to, you know, mess anything up, you can just do stereo, but you don't want to do mono because basically that'll have it be, you know, not wide in your headphones. You want it to be wide in your headphones because, you know, the sounds that you use are purposefully stereo and not mono. So yeah, make sure that it's on stereo or joint stereo, put this to 320, and then you're good here as well. So yeah, you can just do start and then it'll export it, it'll fill this bar up, and then you'll have your thing wherever you saved it to. So yeah, that's pretty much how you export the entire beat. And now I'm going to show you guys how to export trackouts, which is the final thing that I'm going to show you. Also, one thing I forgot to mention is that right here, this file type thing is really important. So if you're going to save it as a WAV file, you have to make sure that this says WAV right here. The same thing applies if you're going to do an MP3 file. You have to actually click on this and then select MP3, and then you can hit save and then export and go through the whole exporting process. Basically what trackouts are is exporting just the piano on its own and just the synth on its own, just this thing on its own, just the 808, just the clap. All of these sounds are going to export on their own as individual files. So basically, if I were to do trackouts for this beat and I were to, you know, play the open hi-hat file, for example, it would have like the first 20 seconds be silence because there's nothing here, and then it would have, you know, this next 10 seconds be the open hi-hat, and then essentially that would work the same with all this stuff as well. So, you know, there would be a silence here on the synth, there would be a silence here for the piano, and, you know, so on and so forth. And basically that's how that's going to work. So usually trackouts are really useful if you have a rapper that's going to rap on your beats, or, you know, has already rapped on your beats and they need the trackouts so that they can send all of the individual tracks to an engineer, so that the engineer can take your sounds, take all the sounds in your beat and make it, you know, cleaner, polish it up, and, you know, make it professional and good sounding and, you know, radio quality. So yeah, that's pretty much the purpose of trackouts. And also, if you were to, you know, upload a beat to a beat store, for example, you would probably have an option for people to buy a trackout lease, so they'll get all of the trackouts individually as well if they buy your trackout lease. So yeah, if you're sending out beats to rappers or something, you don't want to send them trackouts right away. You only want to send trackouts if somebody asks for them, because a lot of times people don't even need trackouts. I don't think any one of the songs that I've produced for rappers, they've actually needed trackouts. It's not a super important thing unless you have like really big artists or engineers working on your beats. So yeah, that's one pretty important thing that you should probably keep in mind about trackouts, is that it's not, you know, super common, but it's nice to have them on hand. So yeah, basically, if you want to do trackouts, what you got to do is, you know, lay out your beat and everything. Once you've, you know, completely finished with your beat, you go up to File, and then you go Export Tracks. And now what you want to do is you want to create a new folder, and then you can just save it as whatever your beat is called, and then just put trackouts afterwards. And now you just want to click on this folder, and now you can just do choose. And now it'll bring up this little screen that we saw before when we exported our beat. And for this, it's probably important that you do WAV file and not MP3, because you want these sounds to be higher quality, because like I said, you're going to be sending these to, you know, like an engineer, and you want it to sound really professional and high quality. So yeah, because we're going to be exporting all of these in WAV, this will take, you know, somewhat of a significant amount of time to export. But yeah, basically just do all the settings that we did before. You can, you know, click on any one of these really. You can do 32-bit, 16-bit, whatever, and then keep all this stuff as it is. And then just hit start, and then your trackouts will start exporting. And then once it finishes, you can just go into whatever folder that you saved your trackouts to, and then they'll all be inside there. And then usually when you send it through email or you send it through Google Drive or something, what you want to do is make it into a zip folder. So the way you do that, just for people who don't know how to do that, basically what you're going to do is this right here. So this is an FL Studio beat, but it doesn't really matter because it would be the same as if it were LMMS. So as you can see, all the trackouts are in right here, and what you're going to do is you're going to right click, and then you're just going to do send to, and then compressed zip folder, and then it'll turn into a zip folder, and then it'll be a much more compressed file. And then once you send it to somebody, they can just, you know, right click and then just do extract all, and then they'll have your trackouts, and it'll be transported to them in a smaller file size than if it were, you know, just a gigantic folder. So yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. I showed you guys how to export MIDI files, I showed you guys how to export trackouts, and I showed you guys how to export, you know, just your regular beats on an everyday basis. So yeah, I hope I was able to help out some of the beginners out there who have, you know, never exported before or didn't really know the best settings for exporting, or, you know, possibly helped out, you know, some of the more advanced people as well with certain things like, you know, some information on the trackouts and stuff like that. Make sure to check out my Instagram, my SoundCloud down in the description below, along with the playlist of songs I produced, my Discord, my beat store, all that stuff down there. Go check it out if you wish, and I will see you guys next time.
Turn me up, let's go. Damn, I feel like the man now, yeah. I cannot turn bands down, yeah. Chopper make them stand down, yeah. Got these bitches running wild, yeah. Like a thug in the night.